Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be reacting to and refuting Jared Taylor, a quote-unquote right-wing intellectual. He went to Yale, and he's often held up as being a formidable proponent of far-right white advocacy. So I think it's good to rebut a lot of the points. The main proposition of this video that I'll be advancing is very simply that diversity is a strength for America. Maybe not the absolute, most important or most powerful or most impactful strength that America has, but it's certainly up there, and it's one that has undeniably and unequivocally helped us. And yeah, that's basically it. I will say my mic may cut out during this video. I hope not, but if it does, I will probably just cut out the blank spot. It's been acting up. If it does, if I'm speaking and out of nowhere it cuts to another part, just, my apologies, ignore it and try to piece together whatever I was going to say. I'm sure you guys can do it. You're smart. But yeah, I want to start by, I guess, framing this a little bit, because Jared Taylor is an interesting guy. He's not your typical far righter in the sense that we all know that anti-Semitism is rampant on the far right, but Jared Taylor very peculiarly is not anti-Semitic. In fact, you could possibly describe him as philo-Semitic. This comes from the ADL, of all people, or organizations rather. It says, Taylor eschews anti-Semitism, seeing Jews as white, greatly influential, and the, quote, conscience of society, end quote. Jared Taylor rather seeks to partner with Jews who share his views on race and racial diversity. Jews have been speakers or participants at all 8 American Renaissance conferences. And then it goes on. I think that is important, because I think that there is very obviously a connection between some who hold pro-Israeli politics and some on the far right. And I've said this before, but I genuinely think that there's something there. Insofar as the left posed a true institutional threat to these interests, whether it was the protests that happened across the elite American universities, or the administrators at the very same institutions, sort of standing strong on this left-wing line, you could say. We saw that after this stuff started happening, right-wing politics blew up online. Decensorship happened. Finally, the chains were pulled off, and Nick is making the rounds on podcast after podcast. X is a haven for white supremacist content. I don't think it's a coincidence that these things coincided. And yeah, it's unfortunate that anyone would ally themselves with these kinds of despicable, anti-intellectual views that are held by people like Jared Taylor or Nick Fuentes. They run contrary to everything that America is, and it's a disappointing thing all around. But I wanted to start by going over a sort of argument for why diversity is a strength, because I think that Jared Taylor does a good job at throwing a bunch of shit at the wall, hoping that it sticks. He cites studies that are, for some reason, just unable to be located. I can't find them. I'm searching everywhere. Or ones that are behind paywalls, and they're very difficult to gain access to, and they don't end up supporting his propositions. So I thought that it would be nice to start off with a little argument myself on why diversity obviously is a strength. But I want to start with a framing quote, because you can only really understand the sort of flailing that Jared Taylor and a lot of far right-wingers are doing when you understand that there is a little bit of a shift going on in America. They are right about that. I have argued, and I still stand strong with the belief that America was never meant to be a normatively white nation. It's not something that was in the mind of most of the founders. It's not something that was ever written into our law, very purposefully so. There's a canon of interpretation in law which says that basically the inclusion of some things and the exclusion of others implies basically intent vis-a-vis that exclusion. And to put it simply, if something is not there, and they could have put it there, and they're very specific in other areas that relate to that area, the fact that they didn't put it there speaks to their intent. In other words, they didn't intend for it to be that way. But it is true that in a descriptive sense, we have been a white nation. We have been, I think we were like 80 to 90% white up until a few decades ago. And before that, we were led basically by WAFs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who held their positions of power on the basis of things that were not always meritocratic. A lot of the times they were based on your family, based on your last name, based on who you knew, based on where you came from. It's one thing a lot of people don't understand. The term WASP doesn't apply to descriptive WASPs. It doesn't mean you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. It means that you were part of a specific milieu. You came from a milieu. You came from a certain social standing, a certain background. And yeah, usually you were a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But it's not the case that every white Anglo-Saxon Protestant was a WASP. And so there have been switch-ups in the sort of people who fill these positions of power. We are far more meritocratic than ever. That's just the truth. And it hasn't all come from the left. I mean, as many of you know, I'm opposed to affirmative action for the most part. I'm sure that there are okay ways to instantiate it, but for the most part, it hasn't been instantiated perfectly. And so I would prefer a more pure meritocratic system, though I understand that there are arguments that run contrary to that have some force. But so I would say that the reforms vis-a-vis affirmative action in universities were pro-meritocracy, and those actually came from the right. So it's not been a sort of univocal endeavor, but I think that over time we have shifted towards a more meritocratic society, and things are changing. But there have been some sort of unforeseen consequences as a result of that change. A good example is if you look at like the best programmers. You look at the people who are, staffing companies in Silicon Valley. A lot of them are not white. And so maybe a lot of these people who thought, well, we'll bring the best of the best, maybe they thought that meant just keeping African Americans out because they have these biases where they think that, it's going to end up being all white people. But then they turned around and it was actually a lot of Indians and Asians who ended up filling those positions. And all of a sudden, they're not pro-meritocracy, they're pro-nativist. They're pro, helping out native-born white Americans who maybe, in a pure meritocratic sense, don't deserve the position, but deserve it, I guess, because they were born in America and have lineage in America. And all of this is to say that things are changing, and there is flailing that is happening by people who are disadvantaged as a consequence of these changes. And so I think this Machiavelli quote sort of summarizes it well. It says, it's not a Machiavelli quote, rather it's a quote analyzing Machiavelli. It says, disdainful of the hereditarian principle, Machiavelli offered the new science of statecraft as the alternative to the old principle of legitimacy, boldly promising to, quote, make a new prince seem to be an old one, and immediately make him safer and firmer in his realm than if he had grown old in it. To this extent, the new science reflected an age of extreme social mobility, and, quote, age of the bastards, as Burckhardt called it. In serving the new men as they scrambled for power, status, and glory, the new science worked as a great equalizer, elevating the comparative position of those who pitted ability against hereditary right. Quote, Machiavelli painted a striking portrait of the figure which was to bedevil modern politics. The new man was the offspring of an age of restless ambition, of the rapid transformation of institutions and quick shifts in power among the elite groups. He symbolized in brief the flux of politics, its impermanency, and its endlessly ongoing character. What is that quote talking about? Well, it's saying that Machiavelli brings in this novel political science, which is, it runs contrary to the hereditarianism, the sort of assumption of power that comes about as a consequence of your lineage, which was so characteristic of the European system before him. It was a shift towards meritocracy, and there was obviously a reaction from the embedded and anachronistic power structure, which was on its way out. And I think that is basically the same thing that we see when we see these people who wish for a return to like a normatively pro-white policy. It's not that their arguments are going to be based in empirical fact, because they can't be. We got here because we realized that empirically it's better to import very high IQ Indian and Asian programmers if our goal is to produce the best outcomes and outputs in those sectors. So it can't be based off of that. It has to be based off of dishonest argumentation meant to stir the passions of people who feel as though they've been screwed over, in short, from the changes. And so I think that framing is important because it's the only way you can understand why he is so upset and passionate about this. It's because things are changing and he's basically upset. It reminds me a lot of Nick Fuentes and his statement that he had his political awakening when he left his home from the Chicago suburbs and went to the very dangerous, diverse, and scary Boston to study at university. And he was basically sad because he realized that things weren't always going to be like they were when he was a kid. And that's true. Most people adapt. I guess right-wingers just try to figure out a way to go back to their childhood. But that's not possible, obviously. But without further ado, let's hear the argument. What is my argument? So all of this has been to say that things are changing. That's true. But what you cannot say is that things are deteriorating, because they're not. What is a strength? He says that diversity, racial diversity, is not a strength for America. But he never defined strength. I can think of a few metrics by which we may define strength: economics, crime, culture. And on every metric that I can imagine, economics, crime, culture, pragmatics, diversity, ethnic diversity in particular, is beneficial. And so I'm not quite sure what his argument rests upon. But let's run through a little bit of empirics to back up this notion that economically, criminally speaking, culturally speaking, and speaking in terms of pragmatics, racial diversity is a benefit for us. Let's start with economics. Economics is uncontroversial vis-a-vis immigration. I've made the case a million times now. Immigrants boost the economy. They make universities get more patents, apply for more patents. They're more competitive in a lot of industries, much to the dismay of some people. The children of immigrants or immigrants themselves have founded half of Fortune 500 companies. They are disproportionately represented in healthcare, in STEM, in master's, PhD programs, JD programs, MD programs. They uphold important sectors like the hospitality sector, the agricultural sector, the construction sector. And we saw this even from the right wing whenever Trump was deporting people who were very important to the agricultural sector. And prominent voices in that sector came and said, hey, can you stop doing this? Because we need these people. It's pretty uncontroversial to say that when you have more human capital, you become more economically productive, especially when our greatest competitors, China, India, economically speaking at least, have such an advantage vis-a-vis this metric. They have a ton of people. We need people to keep up, and we're not producing them natively. So it's kind of uncontroversial to say that economically speaking, racial diversity, as it is filtered through and as it comes through immigration, whether it's illegal or legal, is economically beneficial. But this has also been true, and the reason I'm speaking in terms of immigrants is because immigrants are where our diversity comes from, right? We were 90% roughly white prior to the influx of immigrants, and the rest of it was mostly African American. These people are still here, but we've had an influx of peoples from the Latin America, from Africa, from Asia, some areas in Europe. And so in order to assess the impact of diversity, we look at these streams through which they come in and how they impact the nation. But you can also look at it through a non-immigrant lens. Diverse states are wealthier, more economically productive, and this is similarly true with the largest and most diverse cities. So even if you're speaking non-immigrant-wise, having a more diverse population is coincident with having a richer state and or city, and I'll get into more of that later. But that's the economics argument. I mean, that's pretty uncontroversial. I don't think there's anything new there. I've said basically all of that before. Let's talk crime. Crime is also uncontroversial. We can start with immigration, but I've already mentioned it. I repeat myself a lot, but it's because this stuff is true today. It was true yesterday, and it'll be true tomorrow. It was true back when people were complaining about immigrants 100 years ago and 200 years ago. And similarly, it'll be true in 100 or 200 years. They're very basic arguments, but both illegals and legals commit less crime than the native-born population. Texas collects data on illegal immigrants and legal immigrants and finds that both commit less crime than native-born Americans, even native-born whites. If you want to say, like right-wingers do, that it's all black Americans who commit crime and whites are just, picking flowers or I don't know, doing something fun, being jovial and zany as they always are. But yeah, the reality is illegals and legals commit less crime than even those white Americans. But perhaps more interestingly, this holds for diversity as it arises from native-born Americans too. So it's not just immigrants that are making it safer. Diversity, qua diversity, makes an area safer. This is quoting from research from the London School of Economics and Political Science. It says, using evidence from Southern California, they tested the effects of racial diversity on neighborhood crime rates, finding that there were fewer violent and property crimes in neighborhood blocks which were more diverse, especially those in more diverse areas. This is from the Brookings report. It says, quote, the strength of the relationship between the share of black residents and property crime has decreased by half between 1990 and 2008. So that's to the people who will say that, yeah, but what about African Americans? Because people really like to speak about their crime rate. Well, the strength of the relationship between the share of black residents and property crime has decreased by half. So even that has been shrinking. And they go on to say that while the association between the share of Hispanic residents and violent crime has all but disappeared. In other words, there's actually, it's not only disappeared, but we'll go on to speak more. It's actually, there's a negative correlation now between types of crime and the share of the population, which is Hispanic. And this is pretty obvious if you look at major Hispanic cities like El Paso. They're some of the safest for their size in the nation, even when compared to majority white large cities. Like I think Oklahoma City is one that I've looked at. This is another quote. It says, the key factor related to decreasing crime, as it turns out, lies in the growing racial, ethnic, and demographic diversity of our cities and metro areas. Our analysis found that the Hispanic share of the population is negatively associated with urban crime. Crime also fell as the percentage of the population that is non-white and the percentage that is gay increased. And of all the variables in our analysis, the one that is most consistently negatively associated with crime is a place's percentage of foreign-born residents. Not only did we find a negative correlation of negative 0.36 between foreign-born share and crime in general, the pattern held across all of the many various types of crime, from murder and arson to burglary and car theft. So that's to the people who will say, well, what about other types? Maybe this is one specific cherry-picked stat. Holds across other types of crime. So there's criminality. What about culture? Well, this one was a little bit fun to research. I looked at the most ordered foods through Grubhub just to see what people are eating. The number one is a burrito, which I'm not sure, but last time I checked, I don't think that's an Anglo-American invention. Then it's the cheeseburger, cheese pizza, thank you Italians, pad thai, chicken quesadilla, California roll, fried chicken sandwich, Caesar salad, chicken tikka masala, and boneless wings. So it's a very diverse list of foods that come from a diverse array of sources. So we enjoy food from a lot of places, and people laugh at this. People are like, oh, would they have good food? I mean, I actually care about what I'm eating on a day-to-day basis. That plays into my quality of life. Maybe I'm just a big back as it were, but I enjoy food, and I think most people do as well. I then looked at the top 50 USA Spotify. Now, I did write this little document a few days ago, so maybe this is different, but I'm sure it's pretty similar. When I checked the top 50 USA Spotify, Bad Bunny, who I wasn't aware of until the Super Bowl, held the number 1 spot, the number 4 spot, the number 6 spot, the number 14 spot, and the number 18 spot. And there were more, but I didn't want to keep going down the list. So people apparently enjoyed this music that is in Spanish. And yeah, I mean, to have that much to have that level of dominance on the charts implies that it's not just Spanish speakers listening to them. Interesting side note, this was actually taken before the Super Bowl performance, so I'm sure it was even more dominant after the Super Bowl performance. Then I looked at a CBS article, which amongst other articles confirmed that rap was one of the most popular genres of music amongst Americans, and that comes from mostly black Americans. So culturally, we also benefit, whether it's food or music. But finally, the pragmatics just kind of speak for themselves. There's a declining birth rate in America, and it's not reversing, and it doesn't look like any kind of intervention is going to be able to solve the problem, especially because we don't have 18 years to wait for people to work jobs. People are already here. That's another big one. Companies, educational institutions, and society simply must learn to work together or will fail at this point. There's no reversing the demographic diversity in America. And so unless someone is openly advocating for, I don't know, genocide, or you're not going to get non-white people out of America. And unless you want some sort of race war and you're living in like a fantasy world, you need to understand that the only actual way to go forward is just simply to find a way to make diversity work. We're also in an AI arms race. A lot of people don't speak about this, but the AI arms race is extremely important, and we're in the race with giants that are capable of amassing endless amounts of human talent. Some of our brightest and most vital in this regard are non-white. They're Indians, they're Asians, they're people who are coming over and helping us in this AI war, which is extremely important. I mean, you hear about it all the time. It's become a little bit cliche, but it's literally just true. I mean, read books. There's a book called like AI and its impacts on policy, economics, and something. Maybe I'll put it in the description. It's another book called AI, and it's like a Henry Kissinger book. It's also written with some MIT professors. I think the like former CEO of Google or something is also an author. It's called like AI and Our Future. Just look up AI Henry Kissinger book. It's extremely important, and it's going to define the geopolitical world going forward. And we don't really have time in this age of rapid development to like wait for homegrown talent, which may never arise, to sort of help us along in this war. And whoever wins the AI arms race will define sovereignty to a meaningful extent. So the pragmatics, really they just speak for themselves. Also, it's just inevitable. If you look throughout history, every dominant empire has expanded. The Macedonian Empire, Rome, Athens, the Aztecs. Expansion is necessary, and expansion involves subsuming and integrating new peoples. And if you don't do it, someone else will, and then you'll be subject to their will. So on all accounts, it's just obvious that diversity is a benefit. But I wanted to do also just this little data dump, because one thing you'll see when we react to Jared Taylor is he loves to just kind of spew out studies and stuff like that. And I'll speak, if I remember, hopefully, I looked in to try to find some of these studies, but it's been a while since I looked, but I'll try my best to remember. I'll call out whenever ones either don't exist or they're misrepresented because I looked into them. But here's my data dump. A 2023 McKinsey study of more than 1,000 companies across 23 countries found organizations in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity were 39% more profitable than those with less diversity. So diversity is correlated with profitability vis-a-vis these corporations that speak of the benefits of diversity. So instead of sort of sitting there in your mother's basement speaking about how they're, lying about the benefits of diversity, I mean, this McKinsey study backs up that it actually is empirically backed that they are benefiting from diversity. I looked into the most happy countries. I wanted to see what the happiest countries in the world are. Are they all like ethnically homogenous countries? And it wasn't the case. The USA is 24. Mexico is 10. Costa Rica is 6. Canada is 18. UK is 23. Belize is 25. These are diverse countries. Some of them extremely diverse. And if you look at the bottom of the list, places like Lebanon, 145, Zimbabwe, 143, Ukraine, 111, these are non-diverse countries. And yet, they are some of the least happy countries in the world. So what this list is really tracking, because I think he brings up happiness in this, what this list is tracking is not diversity, but development and the sort of opportunities that the people have. The close-knit nature of the families, because you could say Mexico's 10, but they're not more developed than the United States. But one, they're still pretty developed, and then two, they have very close-knit family structures, and they're extremely diverse. So the happiness, they fail on that. He speaks about how people don't care about diversity, but according to Pew Research, that's not true. A majority of workers say focusing on DEI is a good thing. 56% said it's a good thing. 28% said it's neither good nor bad. Only 16% were opposed to it and said it's a bad thing. Where are people moving? Well, in absolute terms, the most moved to cities in the U.S. are New York, L.A., Houston, Chicago, San Antonio, Phoenix, Austin, Philadelphia, and Dallas. These are not homogenous cities, and so clearly people are voting with their feet. People love diversity. The happiest U.S. state is Hawaii. Extremely diverse, if you don't know about Hawaii. California, Texas, and New York are the most productive states, economically speaking. New York City, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas, DC, these are the most productive U.S. cities, all very diverse. What about the extremely non-diverse West Virginia, which is 90% white? Well, it's one of the poorest states in the U.S., only second to Mississippi, which is itself more racially homogenous than New York. All of this is to say there's no metric by which we could say that it is not a strength. The only way that we could say that it is not a strength is by inverting the definition of strength and causing strength to mean weakness, in which case it would be true that it's not a weakness. But with that being said, we can get into this video. Let's see how long I've been going. 25 minutes. That's a long argument section. So if you made it through, thank you. Let's get into this video now. I'm gonna up it to 1.5.
We're discussing the topic of whether diversity is good. This is something that most people, I think, kind of take for granted. My opponent has a different opinion, perhaps, about diversity. So he's chosen to come, to some extent, to the Lion's Den, one of the larger historically black colleges, and argue that diversity is, in many cases, bad. So essentially, we're going to do 35 minutes for the first round. Mr. Taylor is going to speak. I'm going to not necessarily respond, but present my case. 10-minute rebuttal, 10-minute rebuttal, then we're opening the floor for questions.
Well, Professor Riley has asked that I go first.
Yeah, I unfairly scheduled him first. I'm comfortable with that.
Ordinarily, if there is a debate, the positive side goes first. And the question before the floor today is whether racial diversity is good for America. So under ordinary debate rules, the affirmative would go first, but I have bowed to Professor Riley's wishes, and I'm happy to go first. But first of all, I would like to thank Professor Riley for inviting me here. I used to get a lot of college and university invitations, but they've really slowed down because on most, at least majority white campuses, they seem to have this idea that everyone has a right not to be offended. Well, you can't really speak the truth about race without offending somebody. And so as a result, on most campuses, very little truth is spoken on the subject of race. So thanks again to Will Riley. Now, the subject of the debate, again, is whether racial diversity is a strength for America. And as you all know, from the president on down, America is full of people who will tell you that it is a wonderful strength. Not only is racial diversity a strength, they will tell you it may well be our greatest strength. Well, they're wrong. Racial diversity is a constant source of tension and conflict, not just in the United States, but in any nation that has tried it.
All right, so let's start off with that. It's a constant source of conflict. My basic response to that is, what the fuck isn't? You can't establish that racial diversity is not a strength by saying it's a source of conflict, because existence is a source of conflict. Having two or more people is a source of conflict. The question is, how much conflict does it cause relative to other conflict-causing states of affairs? That proportional reasoning is never employed here. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree that racial diversity is a source of conflict, just like gender-based diversity is a source of conflict. Are we going to have male-only states? Are we going to have female-only states? I don't think so. But it appears that if this is the train of logic, that's where we should head.
Racial diversity is the presence of more than one race in the same territory. So let's imagine for a moment what the history of the United States would have been like without the racial diversity that arrived on this territory when blacks were brought here.
This is also just so stupid because it presupposes the existence of the races as they're defined today. And the reason why we know that it presupposes that is because to say that racial diversity is the existence of, I think he said, two or more races in one area, is to say that Italians, Greeks, and Swedish people are the same race, because he would say that if all of those people were in America and no one else were in America, well, then America would be one race. I just fundamentally reject the proposition that those groups are not able to be defined as belonging to a different group that would be in all de facto sense as a race. Greeks are closer ethnically, they're closer genetically to their neighbors in non-white areas. They're closer historically, especially to the Near East, than they are to like Swedish people. And so because of this notion just doesn't make any sense. You're treating these as though they're like discrete, different categories that are stable and extant all throughout time. Well, that's simply not true. I was responding to someone just the other day, and I wrote up a little response to them. And I just had so many great examples of the fact that this notion that there is like a white race is so laughable. Everyone's heard the Ben Franklin quote where he said that Germans could never adopt the mannerisms of Brits, that they're not white, that they couldn't adopt their complexion, their language, their customs, whatever. That's obvious. But there's also Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "I think it cannot be maintained by any candid person that the African race have ever occupied or do promise to ever occupy any very high place in the human family. Their present condition is the strongest proof they cannot. The Irish cannot. The American Indian cannot. The Chinese cannot. Before the energy of the Caucasian races, all the other races have quailed and done." We'll just cut out the rest of the quote. The point of this is to say that he's grouping Irish people as non-white. John Sweet said Finns are Mongols whose socialistic ideology aligns them blah, blah, blah with East Asian. So, like, Finnish people aren't white. Irish people aren't white. And then, even funnier, I don't know if you guys saw this where Nick said that Slavs aren't white. And then this guy on Twitter said, Amerimut Mexican test tube baby, calling Albanians Slavic, which they aren't, while saying Slavs aren't white, but having majority med DNA, which has Arabic admixture. Genuinely incredible. So even to this day, people are, fighting over the boundaries of this supposed ontologically distinct group of people. How about we just face the fact that you could cut and slice people a million different ways, and because of that, this notion that two or more races equals conflict would actually impugn the existence of America as a racially diverse place, even absent the inclusion of the peoples that have come in towards the end of the 20th century and beyond.
Imagine American history with no blacks at all. There would have been no slavery, no Civil War, no civil rights movement, no Jim Crow, no busing, no race riots.
First off, there's just no evidence for this. What is the evidence that there would be no Civil War? The Civil War was not just about slavery. Like, seriously, what is the evidence for these propositions? Let me hear all the things that he said wouldn't exist.
No civil rights movement. History with no blacks at all. There would have been no slavery, no civil...
Okay, blacks weren't the only ones that were enslaved in America. And also, there's a very fine line between indentured servitude, as it was practiced in America, and slavery. So, that's just stupid.
Civil War. No civil rights movement.
No civil rights movement? There was an independent female civil rights movement. That's how we got the fucking 19th Amendment, you reach. This guy is like stupid. Is he actually this dumb? Not only was there an independent women's rights movement in America, but it actually opposed often the movements that attempted to liberate black people, because oftentimes their goals clashed. Like, there's writings from feminists in the 19th century that said that once black men were freed, they turned their back on women. And so these were independent, sometimes parallel, but sometimes conflictual movements. And so to say there would be no civil rights movement is just obviously false. I don't know why the hell he would say that.
No Jim Crow, no busing, no race riots.
No Jim Crow, if we're defining Jim Crow as the laws that... Well, even that doesn't work, because Jim Crow also affected, like, Mexicans. And, everyone's seen it. There were also, impacts for Italians and Irish. So, that's clearly not true. But if you define Jim Crow as being relative to the black population, then that would just be tautologically true, and then it would be trivial.
All of that. And it makes no difference whether all of those things that were unpleasant in our history, you can assume that they were 100% the fault of white people if you wish. But the fact remains that the historical balance sheet for black-white racial diversity in the United States is crushingly, crushingly negative.
Not only that, but again, you can't stack up the negatives of something and then say that that proves that it's not a positive, because you would have to compare that to the positives. So, that just doesn't even make any fucking sense. You could literally take the negatives, because there's obviously always negative externalities that come about as a consequence of any state of affairs. So you could take any state of affair, stack up the negatives, and say, therefore, we shouldn't have that state of affair. Think about the fact that, like, sexual assault exists and heinous crimes regarding, things of that nature. Those exist as a consequence often of there being men and women. So should we not have men and women? We should just pick one and eradicate the other? This is ridiculous.
If you remove black-white racial diversity, you remove our worst war, the war in which more Americans died than all our other wars combined. You remove slavery. You remove all of the worst parts of our history. Vanished, disappeared. How can diversity that brought those horrors be a strength? I could sit down right now, and I would have won this debate. But let's move to the present.
Yeah, again, just intellectually lazy.
I'm sure you have followed the racial demonstrations on college campuses such as Yale and Princeton and University of Missouri. Now, none of that commotion would have been taking place without diversity. And you think all of the screaming and demonstrations...
What did he say?
None of that demonstrations on college campuses. But let's move to the present. I'm sure you have followed the racial demonstrations on college campuses such as Yale and Princeton and University of Missouri. Now, none of that commotion would have been taking place without diversity.
Okay, so again, that's either tautological or false. It would be if you said racial protestations, racial protests are happening on college campuses, and that wouldn't happen without racial diversity. That could be just tautological because you're saying racial. In other words, it could be trivially true. But under most interpretations, it would actually just be false. Because, for example, if you look at the sort of Black Lives Matter movement and how it spread to countries that really had nothing to do with it, like even Australia, who have a much smaller population of black people, they protested the same way as a consequence of protests that were happening in America. So it's not true that a country that is racially homogenous wouldn't have racial protests. It's also not true that protest in general on college campuses wouldn't happen without racial diversity. We had protests regarding the Vietnam War. We had protests regarding the conflict in the Middle East recently on American college campuses. So, I mean, college campuses are simply just a hotbed of protest, and they always will be because it's young people who get passionate about issues in the world. And that's something, by the way, that we should encourage. Like, well, I mean, what happened to like Western values of the freedom of expression? Ridiculous.
And you think all of the screaming and demonstrating and all of the conflict is a good thing?
Yeah, yes. Why are we presupposing that conflict is bad? That's another stupid thing. Conflict often is actually beneficial. I looked into one of his studies where he says that diversity causes more conflict. And I found there were two types of conflict that were defined by this study from Wharton. I'll have to find it. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so it's called an analysis of group diversity, conflict, and performance. I think that this is the one if you want to search it. And it describes that there are two different types of diversity. There are two different types of conflict. One of them is not associated with diversity. In other words, increasing diversity doesn't cause it. And the other type of conflict is increased as a consequence of diversity, but that type of conflict has been positively associated with work product output. And so there are conflicts that can arise that resolve themselves in a manner that's actually beneficial for the companies themselves that experience it. Without conflict of ideas, without conflict of thought, the West wouldn't be what it is. Reminds me of the quote from John Stuart Mill where he said that all of mankind could be of one opinion and only one man opposed, and mankind would be just as unjustified in silencing that one man as he would be as much as he would be justified in silencing all of mankind. The point being, eccentricity, individuality is actually valued by the West, and there's no reason to think that conflict should be suppressed or the diversity of thought or ideas should be suppressed. And the empirical investigations support the notion that ethnic diversity is either not related to work product output or positively related.
Right? Does it help people study? No, it creates tension and conflict. Also, what these campus disturbances tell you is just how differently blacks and whites can view the world. Black students at Yale, for example, claim that they are fighting entrenched white supremacy. Well, if Yale were a bastion of white supremacy, would there be any blacks on campus at all? Were white students burning crosses, lynching black students? Were they calling them rude names? No, none of this. All the furor erupted when a professor sent an email message saying that it was not Yale's job to tell Yale students what kind of Halloween costumes to wear. This woman suggested, if you're offended by somebody's costume, maybe you should just tell him. That's white supremacy. Black students at Ivy League universities must be among the most coddled and pampered black people in the history of the world. And if they really believe that they are fighting entrenched white supremacy, they are living in dreamland as far as most white people are concerned. And what about the Black Lives Matter movement? Is that a strength for this country? Is it a strength when people march around screaming, stopping traffic, preventing politicians from delivering their speech?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to think that peaceful protests are not a strength for the country. Well, we even support like non-peaceful uprisings that happened in American history. Like, I don't know, was the Boston Tea Party bad because there was destruction of property? Like, what are you talking about? Yes, protests are sometimes good. Even riots are sometimes good. Like, is it bad that slaves rioted and rebelled against their slave owners? Is that bad now? Because I guess violence is it's just stupid. Like,
is that really a strength?
And the reason why I'm doing these sort of responses is because like that's not actually making an argument. You're not making an argument when you say like this thing happened. Is this a strength? There was conflict. That means this is bad. These are just assertions.
If all of those grievances are completely justified, the Black Lives Matter movement is a sign of fury, of tension, of conflict. And without racial diversity, we wouldn't have any of that. This, too, is an example of how differently blacks and whites see the world. How did the Black Lives Matter movement really get started? It got started in Ferguson, when Michael Brown was shot by a white police officer. When the Ferguson authorities decided not to indict that officer, 64% of whites thought that that was the correct decision. How many blacks thought it was the correct decision? Only 4%. That is a huge difference. Blacks and whites saw the same event, but they saw something completely different. Now, in order to win this debate, I don't have to convince you that whites were right and that blacks were wrong. My job is much easier. My job is simply to point out to you that if blacks and whites can look at the same event and come to completely different conclusions, that's not a strength. That's a weakness. To have people...
Why? Again, why? I mean, what is this proposition? If X and Y can look at the same event and come to completely different conclusions, that's a weakness. I don't think so. I think that that's called intellectual diversity. That's called diversity of thought. It's actually good if you can have an idea, another person can have the negation of that idea or a contrary idea, and you two can hash it out, because that's how progress is made. It reminds me, I studied philosophy of science a lot in undergrad, and that's sort of the benefit of scientific theories, according to people like Karl Popper. It's that they stick their necks out. It's that they, propose things that can be falsified. We want people to take positions, and we want those positions to differ, and we want to be able to test those positions, because that is ultimately how progress comes about. So, I mean, even just at a basic level, these fundamental propositions he's making to advance his argument are not only anti-Western and very totalitarian and, tyranny of the majority kind of thing, but also they're just not obviously true, at least. I'm not going to say they're obviously not true. Maybe he could support it, but this isn't supporting it. He's just making assertions, but maybe he will support it.
So divided by race, they can't even see the same things is a sure sign of perpetual, agonizing conflict.
Also, that doesn't follow. That doesn't follow. Saying that they came to different conclusions is not saying they can't see the same things. So that's just a logical mishap. That's just messy reasoning.
Diversity, furthermore, turns everything into a racial turf war. Are the Oscar nominees too white? Should the next Supreme Court justice be an Asian? Do we need more black policemen? Are there enough Hispanic programmers in Silicon Valley?
I actually don't see what's wrong with asking these questions. Like, should we just not think about, I don't get it. Are you saying, we should spend all our time thinking about quote-unquote important questions? If so, what are the important questions? I mean, if your argument is that diversity is bad because it makes people ask if we should have an Asian Supreme Court justice, I think I'm just going to say, yeah, after hearing all the positives that were outlined at the beginning of the video, I think I'll take it. If that's the downside, I'm fine with that.
In the United States, you can't just say, I hired the best possible programmers for my business, and I ended up with white guys and Asians. No.
Oh, that is so funny, and it's so ironic how when they did start hiring the best guys for the job, it turned out to actually be a lot of Indians and Asians, and then a lot of white right-wingers got very, very mad and said ban them because they're too competitive, and we don't want H-1B. It's so funny. That is delicious. I mean, you don't want meritocracy, dude. You want your white advocacy state, wherein you're coddled because you happen to be born this shade.
Unless you have the right mix, the right racial mix, you could even be sued. That's the kind of thing racial diversity brings. Let's look at this from a different angle. If racial diversity is our nation's greatest strength, it must be a truly, truly wonderful thing. It must be better than having a nation.
Look at that. Now he shifted from is racial diversity a strength to is it our greatest strength? We love, sort of shifting the goalposts to make your argument a lot easier. No, but I don't think people are claiming it's the greatest strength of America is racial diversity. We have a lot of natural resources. We have a lot of land. We're surrounded by 2 oceans. We have friendly neighbors. I mean, there are a ton of strengths. I don't think you have to say diversity is the greatest strength to be able to say that we should be diverse.
The size of a continent with wonderful ports on 2 oceans. It must be better than having the most productive cropland in the world. It must be better than having huge reserves of natural resources. It must be something so great that every man, woman, and child in America wakes up every morning and says, how can I get more of this wonderful stuff into my life? Is that how people really lead their lives? No. Are you all dying to go to school with Hispanics? Do you yearn for roommates or neighbors who speak Chinese? Probably not. Most people prefer to be around folks like themselves. Only white people are deeply confused about this obvious fact.
Also, those two things aren't related. Saying most people don't yearn about having neighbors who speak Chinese, that is probably true. But it doesn't follow from that people prefer to be around people like themselves. I also don't yearn for pizza with, something on it that people haven't done yet, but that is probably pretty good. Just imagine whatever, pizza with like pulled pork or something. I don't know. That sounds kind of gross. Imagine there's something that's really good on pizza that we haven't thought of yet. It's true that I don't yearn for that. It's also true that I don't oppose it and that I don't prefer to eat only the same type of pizza. They're just two unrelated statements. And the reason I do this a lot is just to show you that reasoning doesn't actually work.
2010, Brown University, big Ivy League university, did a study about housing segregation. And John Logan is the professor who was the lead researcher. What he found, I quote, he says, Among minority households, even those with relatively high incomes tend to be clustered in neighborhoods where most of their neighbors are the same race. Race trumps income. In other words, black people who have enough money to buy a house in a white neighborhood bought houses in black neighborhoods instead. Well, Professor John Logan thinks this is all wrong. He has some kind of theory about how...
I just want to say real quick, that is totally unsurprising. People like to live where they grew up more often than not. Moving is not the sort of majority outcome. Most people don't move across the country. Most people don't move to another country. Most people like to live where they grew up. They might get a nice house where they grew up, but they live around the same city, around the same area. And so if you're a black person, you're likely to live in an area that's mostly black as a consequence of actually kind of like historical factors that are a little bit sad. Obviously more than a little bit sad, but I don't know if Jared Taylor would agree. But so because that's where they're likely to be born, that's where they're likely to stay, even if they get money. Why? Because their family's there. Their social network is there. And so it's actually completely unsurprising that the majority of people would end up around those areas. It's also true that they usually would probably end up in, if they have more money, in a different neighborhood than they grew up in. But yeah, they're going to be around the same sort of cluster that they were in before. I actually don't see why that's surprising to anyone. Anyone who sort of understands how averages work would understand that.
Real estate agents are tricking black people and making them buy houses in black neighborhoods. I feel like telling you, John darling, there are black people with enough money to live in white neighborhoods who prefer to live with black people. Not every black person in America wants you as a neighbor. Well, that's something he seems utterly incapable of understanding. The other day, I read an article in a Los Angeles newspaper about housing segregation in California. That state, as you know, is a real stew. There are people from all over the place there. And the article was one long moan about the fact that not only are there racially segregated neighborhoods, there are buildings, entire apartment buildings, where every single tenant might be from Korea, or every single tenant might be from Salvador.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you come over and you don't speak English, and you only speak Spanish, or you only speak Korean, you're going to want to be around other Koreans or other people who speak Spanish, because you're going to want to be able to buy things, to converse with people, to live your life. I mean, what are these obvious like truths? This is just really dumb. Why does he think this builds an argument?
Well, the author of this article was all upset about this, another goofy white person. He seems to think that this is somehow a trick too. Well, those people are living in those buildings because they prefer it that way. They like to live with people like themselves because they don't think diversity is a strength. Now, if you want to understand race in the United
Just a plain bare assertion with nothing else to back it up.
States, all you need to do is go to church. Yes, just go to church. Did you know that 95% of the church congregations in this country are at least 80% one race, and lots of them are 100% one race?
Spoiler alert, people who go to churches usually go to the same church that their parents went to, and their parents' parents went to, and their parents' parents went to, because church is a tradition. And guess what? Churches used to be segregated. That was like the policy of them. And so it's, again, kind of unsurprising.
There are even about 4,000 Asian congregations in the United States. Well,
yes, they speak Asian languages, and they have mass and services in those languages.
You are free to go to whatever church you like. Nobody's going to bar the door. Nobody's going to run you off. But when people are completely free to make choices that make them feel comfortable, they go and worship with people like themselves. People want to live, work, socialize, and go to church with their own tribe. A survey of Californians conducted by UC Berkeley found that a majority of whites, Hispanics, blacks, and Asians all agreed with the statement that people are happier when they are segregated.
I looked that up, couldn't find it. If you guys can find it, let me know. Seems fake. I even went to the AIs and said, I pasted the transcript and said, can you find this this survey that he's talking about? And I couldn't find it. So if someone can find it and send that to me, I would appreciate that. I have a feeling it either doesn't exist or is being severely misconstrued such that it can't be searched.
Again, California, as you know, is a mishmash. People from all over the world moving in, and Hispanics especially have been moving into south central Los Angeles, which used to be overwhelmingly black. Well, here is what the president of one black homeowners association said about Hispanics moving in.
Who cares?
And I quote,
Who cares what one person said? That's not evidence of the sentiment of an entire race.
a different culture, a different breed of people. They don't have the same values. You can't get together with them. It's like mixing oil and water. Here is what one black person told the Philadelphia Inquirer some years ago. He says, we don't want whites living in our neighborhoods. We don't want our children going to school with theirs. We don't want our daughters and sons marrying their sons and daughters. No thanks. Well, why have I been talking about segregation? It's because it's about how people really live, not what they claim to believe. It shows what they really think about diversity. Most of the time, they don't like it, and they steer clear of it. Now, don't get me wrong.
Is that why people are flocking to the most diverse states and cities in the Union?
If some people want to mix it up, absolutely, God bless them. After I have finished talking, somebody is going to get up, probably a white person, and he's going to say, I love my Mexican friends and my Chinese friends. I say, fine, I'm happy for you. Love them for all you're worth. But don't think that you're somehow superior to the vast majority of people who prefer to be with people like themselves. And now what happens when people who prefer not to mix are forced to mix? The classic example of this, of course, is school busing back in the 1970s. And what happened when black children were bused clear across town to formerly white schools? Well, the white people cleared out. In Baltimore, there were 9 high schools that went from completely white to completely black in just 7 years. That's like overnight. The white people in Baltimore apparently did not think that racial diversity
Sorry if you
was
guys can hear that.
and it
I
wasn't
don't know why that keeps happening.
just the people of Baltimore. White people cleared out everywhere. If you go to some of the biggest school districts in this country, you have to pull out a pair of binoculars to find a white student. In all of Dallas, Texas, only 4.6% of the students are white. In Los Angeles, 8.7%. In Houston, 7.8%. In Detroit, it's just 2.6%. Everybody else is non-white. Any white child who wanted a good stiff dose of diversity, this wonderful thing called racial diversity, all he'd have to do is enroll in the public schools in Chicago or in Miami or in Washington, D.C. But somehow, they don't. Well, so the whites ran away. But in many schools, there was still diversity. Why? Because the Hispanics and the blacks stayed behind. And you know what happened? Riots. Los Angeles, in particular, has a long, long history of black and Hispanic riots. They have been fighting each other time after time, year after year. Just last November, in Hawthorne High School in Los Angeles, there was a riot with 300 blacks and Hispanics pounding each other. 30 of them were later expelled or suspended. Several were arrested. But this stuff is just local news. And it's not just Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not really much to say here. This would sort of be like me saying that white people have a huge problem shooting up schools because just last November there was a white guy who shot up a school. And then just in the summer before that, there was another white guy who shot up a school. And before that, a white guy shot up a mosque. And, you know, I mean, like, we have a lot of people in this country. Bad things happen. You're not going to be able to pull trends about a group of people by looking at headlines in the news. You're going to have to actually just look at the empirics. And, I mean, there's a reason he's not citing studies on the prevalence of race riots in schools. It's because it's not that big of a deal. Things happen. To impute that to an entire group of people is lazy and dishonest.
In school riots, blacks versus Hispanics, all around the country. You can have blacks versus Hispanics, blacks versus Arabs, Hispanics versus American Indians, whites versus Hispanics, just about any mix you can imagine.
Like, how many Hispanic versus American Indian riots have you seen? That one doesn't even really make any sense because Hispanic people are white and American Indian. So it would be like two racially similar groups warring. Like they're like basically the same thing. But I don't know if he knows that.
There have been school riots. Did you know that there are even a number of Southern Californian schools where the American flag has been banned? Why is that?
Because I looked at this. I couldn't find this either. So let me know where the American flag has been banned. I saw there was one where they didn't let them fly foreign flags. I saw there was one where like a T-shirt was banned. But I couldn't find the school that banned the American flag. So I don't know. Let me know.
Because the American flag so provokes Hispanics that they are likely to riot or be violent.
Who believes that? Who actually believes that? There are schools in Southern California that are like, these Hispanics, they're going to riot if you show the American flag. You can't do that. Like, hide. Like, what the fuck, man? This is so stupid.
Has the power of turning old glory.
And like, even right now, I'll just look it up. Like, school in California banned American flag. Yeah, I'm seeing nothing. Again, I see the T-shirt thing. And the T-shirt was even just on a holiday. So it wasn't even like an actual T-shirt ban. And that was upheld by the Ninth Circuit, rejected to be heard by the Supreme Court. So that's not what he's talking about. Let me just look up school banned American flag. Maybe he didn't say California. Yeah, I'm not saying it. I'm saying that this one is a truck one, but this was after the debate happened. Yeah, so I'm just not saying what he's talking about. But that's unsurprising, I guess.
Into the equivalent of gang colors. And you want to hear the saddest story ever of school diversity? I'll tell you. In 2010, the graduation ceremony of Puesta del Sol Elementary School in Victorville, California, had to be shut down and stopped because black and white parents rioted. Police locked down the school and made arrests. This is a graduation ceremony at an elementary school. I guess they didn't find diversity a strength either. So the government integrated schools. We got white flight and we got riots. When there aren't riots, students generally keep to themselves. They self-segregate. But there's a different kind of institution that the government has integrated even more thoroughly than any school in the country, and that's prisons. What's the result there? Again, race riot.
I love when people bring up the prison example. You take a bunch of below average IQ, extremely high degree of psychopaths, and you lock them in a completely unnatural environment with artificial rules and constraints, with the lack of good food, lack of access to sunlight, lack of access to recreational activities, and they fight. Oh my God! I mean, wow! This is a big deal. We really need to change policy on the basis of what prisoners are doing. Ridiculous, man.
I could give you a long, long list of prison race riots in which people have been killed, maimed, slashed, sent to the hospital. And that's why in prisons all around the country, people stick together by race for their own security. A man who's...
Yeah, guess what? You know what would even... so they stick together by race, and it's pretty bad. But guess what? We still allow them to all be in the same place despite being of different races. You know who we don't allow to be in the same prison? Men and women. So the conflicts and disputes that arise between men and women are even greater. So again, my question is, when is the male-only state becoming a thing? I don't want to be a part of that, but I think Jared Taylor wants the first-class ticket to fly on over there, because that would, I guess, make a state with only white men, and they can't have different colored hair, they can't have different colored eyes. No differences, or else conflict might arise, and conflict is always bad in this state. And we'll just see how productive it is, I guess.
Spent 4 years in a California prison, wrote an article for the Los Angeles Times about life in prison. He wrote about what he called the #1 rule for survival, and I quote, "The races and ethnic groups stick together, there is no other rule." Here's another white guy writing about what it's like to do time in Texas. This is what he writes. "Because of my prison experience, I can't stand being in the presence of blacks. I can't even listen to my old favorite Motown music anymore." Then he goes on to say, "In the aftermath of the Bird murder," this was the black guy who was dragged to death in Jasper, Texas. "In the aftermath, I read one commentator's opinion in which he expressed disappointment that ex-cons could come out of prison with unresolved racial problems despite the racial integration of the prisons. Despite..."
I missed this lecture in my political science degree in undergrad, which said that policy should be dictated by the approbation and disapprobation of prisoners. We should look to what the prisoners think, and that's how we should decide what to do. That's not democracy. I don't know. I guess I don't know what that's called.
Buddy, I have news for you. How about because of racial integration? You know what the #1 demand of prisoners in American prisons is? Segregation. Forced integration means that people are going to die.
Again, just made that up. Looked for it, couldn't find it. #1 demand of prisoners is probably like, let me out of here. Give me better food. I couldn't find the thing that he's talking about, though.
But no, we can't do the humane thing and separate them because we have this baloney theory about diversity being strength. Well, tell that to the guys who are dead, who have 40 stitches because of diversity. And by the way, if you read about a riot in a school or a riot in a prison, it's going to be about race. You never hear about the liberals and the conservatives or the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians trying to kill each other. No. If there's a riot, it's about race.
That's just ridiculous. There's obviously other kinds of riots that happen. We were just talking about the conflicts that came about as a result of the Vietnam War, which led to deaths on college campus as a consequence of the uprisings and backlash of the American actions. So, that's just one example off the top of my head.
Well, what about the workplace? Aren't there lots and lots of companies that brag about their diverse workforces? This is job #1. This is great for the company, makes for great profits. All baloney.
Not baloney again. I cited the 2023 McKinsey study, which found that of more than 1,000 companies across 23 countries, organizations in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity were 39% more profitable than those with less diversity. So it's not baloney, it's empirically verified.
Kochan, a professor at MIT, he has probably done more research on corporate diversity than anybody. And the first thing he did when he started his research was contact 20 big companies that bragged about how great diversity was. And to his astonishment, not a single one of them had done a study as to how diversity really helped with operations or the bottom line. In fact, as Professor Kochan continued to do his work, after 5 years, he discovered that the more diversity there is, the more conflict in the workplace, the more likely people are to resign.
It's true that they have associated growing diversity in a workplace with conflict, but the type of conflict that has been found to increase has actually been found to lead to productivity benefits and performance benefits in the workplace. So, and the negative and deleterious kind of conflict is unrelated to ethnic diversity.
Conclusion is, and I quote, the diversity industry is built on sand. People who praise diversity like to point to a 2007 book by Scott Page of the University of Michigan. This book is called The Difference, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups, Firms, Schools, and Societies. Sounds very promising, doesn't it? Finally, here's proof that diversity works. But no. Scott Page is writing about the importance of different points of view and problem-solving techniques. When it comes to racial diversity, this is what he says. Lots of strange things can happen in a diverse group that would not be likely to happen among homogeneous people, including physical and verbal violence. The more different we are, the less we agree. Group dynamics can create no end of problems. People prefer to hang with people like themselves.
Who believes that? Who believes that like physical violence can't arise in an all-white workplace? I just don't. Number one, it's an assertion without evidence from some guy who published a book I've never heard of. And number two, it's sort of like prima facie false. I mean, violence can arise in any workplace.
This is just common sense. In fact, a large-scale survey called the National Study of the Changing Workforce found that more than half of respondents to the poll said they preferred to work with people not only who were of the same race, but the same sex and same level of education.
Again, couldn't find that. Let me know if you can find it. Everything that I found said the opposite. Again, I cited the Pew Research, which said that over half of people agreed that DEI efforts were actually beneficial and that they were happy when their company made them, which goes to speak to the exact opposite result.
Now, you've all heard about the diversity training and diversity management, diversity consulting. It's a $10 billion a year industry. But think about it. Why does the country have to spend $10 billion every year trying to figure out how to manage something that's supposed to be wonderful?
What the fuck is that supposed to mean? We spend a lot of money on things that are obviously beneficial. Like, why does the country spend so much money trying to manage healthcare if healthcare is supposed to be a good thing? How is this guy taken seriously by anyone? Oh my god, okay, this has been an hour long. I have to end this. That's insane. Oh shit. His video is more of the same. It's really nonsense. It's all empirical bullshit. It's falsified by a quick Google search. Half of his studies that he cites you can't even find. His surveys don't exist, or they're maybe misconstrued to the point of being unsearchable. Every single thing that he said, we found empirics that point to the exact opposite result, and no empirics that point towards his result. We've laid out a clean argument as to why diversity is actually a good thing, and that's that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Discord, check out all that stuff, and see you.